But as he was preaching blood atonement early in 1857, Brigham Young asked, "Will you love that man or woman well enough to shed their blood?" He knew hundreds of people who could have been saved if their lives had been taken and their blood spilled on the ground as a smoking incense to the Almighty, but who are now angels of the devil. If a man wanted salvation and it was, quote, necessary to spill his blood on the earth in order that he might be saved, spill it. That is the way to love mankind. In private, he was even more explicit. He told the Council of 50 in March 1849, "I want their cursed heads cut off, that they may atone for their sins." Now, this, of course, was part of the religious doctrine that the saints had a right to kill a sinner to save him when he commits those crimes that can only be atoned for by the shedding of blood.
Blood atonement, a bloody ritual that I was taught as a young girl. However, it was taught only as a historical anomaly of the early Mormon Church. This was to be contradicted when I was a young college student and the most horrific blood atonement ritual occurred to a young married woman and her baby who had their throats slit from ear to ear, their blood spilled to the ground, and the perpetrators were a Mormon fundamentalist pair of brothers called the Lafferty brothers. This horrific murder has been documented in John Krakauer's Under the Banner of Heaven. Therefore, at this early age of about 20, I understood that these blood atonement rituals were engaged in regularly by the secret fundamentalist Mormons who believe they are the true Mormonism and were set apart by the Mormon prophet to practice underground the pristine, polygamous cult and rituals of blood atonement.
And come to think of it, why wouldn't these fundamentalist groups think that they're the pure Mormon Church? Since we, as conventional Mormons, are taught that blood atonement and polygamy are celestial principles. Even to this day, the conventional Mormons are taught blood atonement and polygamy are celestial principles to be practiced in the next life. So, if I were a fundamentalist engaging in polygamy and blood atonement, I guess I would suspect that I am practicing the real religion, and conventional Mormons are practicing a fake form, or what they would call an easy form of religion in which they don't have to participate in some of the crueler aspects of God's work. Yes, these Mormon fundamentalists are taught to be ruthless in their engagement with other people not of the bloodline, in which they are taught to totally decimate. And those are the operative words, bloodline. The bloodline appears to be very important to these genocidal assassins that seem to think that they are destined to rule the earth. Well, there may be something to it, because it appears that these bloodlines are very vulnerable to hypnotism and mind control.
The Mormons believe and teach that there are certain sins in Zion which can be atoned for only by the shedding of blood or blood atonement. By this, they do not mean sins or transgressions against the civil law, but sins against the Mormon Church and the priestly ordinances. I myself have heard older mothers say in Salt Lake City that they would not hesitate to perform this bloodshed in the case of their own offspring if they fell away or denied the faith, since this was the only way of salvation for them.
Yeah. Members of the Church of the Firstborn, the same church that Lori and Chad Daybell believe to practice in secret.
If you want to look in Wikipedia under Mormon fundamentalism, you will find a short history of some of the breakoff fundamentalist groups that supposedly were set apart by Joseph Fielding Smith to go underground and practice the pristine form of Mormonism with what I call the twin evils of blood atonement and polygamy. People who've been observing this phenomenon that the Mormon Church is slowly trying to normalize polygamy, even though it is a secret organization filled with criminal activity and sexual improprieties, in which women are held as virtual slaves, and blood atonement is their punishment if they do not obey. This blood atonement can be seen also in the Middle East under Islamic controlled fundamentalist regimes, such as Saudi Arabia being the most egregious. Women are held as virtual prisoners, and if they go against even their fathers, it is legally permitted that fathers may kill their own daughters. This is the totalitarian regime that is dreamed by these Mormon fundamentalist groups. So some of the Mormon fundamentalist sects are the Apostolic United Brethren. Now, this is the Church of the Firstborn arises out of. Then we have the Canadian group in Bountiful, Utah. And then we have the Church of Jesus Christ, Original Doctrine. I mean, you can go to Wikipedia and look at all these break-off churches. It is said that close to 50,000 of these integrated underground fundamentalists, largely in Lehi, Utah, there are approximately 40,000, and many of them work at Bluffdale for the military and the NSA. So what you have as far as people who are surveilling you, spying on you out of Bluffdale, Utah, recording everything you do and say online or even in the new appliances that have recorders. Anyway, this is being run or organized by many fundamentalist crazy groups. Just think about that. And they want to legalize this kind of activity. And at this point, that of all the people who are guilty in the Chad Daybell incident with killing of the two children, that Charles Vallow, that Lori Daybell appears to me to be mind control, under clinical mind control. And there are modern technologies which document how Mormons who are plentiful in the CIA have perfected the technology of what they call splitting the brain and targeting parts of the brains through implants and through deadly lasers to basically create these Manchurian Mormon assassins.
It's the stuff of a Hollywood movie, but a group of veterans has filed a lawsuit against the CIA and U.S. Army claiming that the government planted remote-controlled devices in their brains. The claims relate to a government program at the U.S. Army's Edgewood Arsenal in Maryland, where scientists tested hundreds of chemical and biological substances on at least 7,800 servicemen. So could this really be happening? Well, joining me to help discuss this is Dr. Colin Ross, president of the Colin A. Ross Institute for Psychological Trauma. Dr. Ross, tell me, is this really happening? Did the government really take part in mind control experiments on soldiers? What kind of stories have you heard from the survivors of these experiments? I know you've had access to thousands of documents from the CIA.
Well, it's just like you just said, there's two kind of streams of information. There's stories from survivors, and then there's the documents. So if I go to the documents first, they're very, very detailed, 15,000 pages plus. And we're starting back in 1950 with projects called Artichoke and Bluebird, which were then rolled over into MK Ultra, which in turn was rolled over to MK Search, and then all the documents stopped in 1973. So in that era, 50 to 73, there's a whole host of different types of mind control experiments: hypnosis, LSD, special interrogation chambers, and brain electrode implants. And so there's projects in the CIA documents and in Army records where electrodes are put into dolphins, and the dolphins are directed by remote transmitter to deliver a bomb to a target. And there's a discussion of similar technology in cats and other animals. There's research funded by the Office of Naval Research, published in mainstream journals, where electrodes are put in the brains of cats, dogs, and their behaviors controlled, and even human beings at Harvard and Yale. So this is absolutely documented fact.
So tell me how commonplace this was. Are we talking about one program that took place decades ago, or do you think it's happening more often than that? And if so, how could it be so secretive? I mean, most people would think this can't be true. This is stuff out of a movie.
Right. It was not just one program back in the 50s, 60s, 70s. It was Harvard, Yale, Tulane, UCLA. So we know there was more than one university involved, more than one branch of the military, more than one program for a fact. What's going on currently, of course, is all classified. People tell you stories about it, but I can't actually prove that it's happening today. I'm certain that it is, but I can't prove it.
Okay, so did these people know what was happening to them? I mean, in a lot of the articles I've read, it seemed like they kind of volunteered to be part of some sort of experiment, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the different experiments, like there was a group of children in a school for the mentally retarded in New England. Their parents were told that the children were participating in a study of a dietary supplement, but actually plutonium was being added to their cereal. So there's all types of different experiments where no real consent was given, the people didn't really know what was going on, and they were basically tricked. And I think in the brain electrode experiments, it's kind of a combination of both. Some patients were told you have electrodes put in your brain, but it's for some therapy purpose, when it was really research. Others were told, go here and volunteer, and you don't really have much choice. And others were given sort of a more exact story.
So what exactly would the government do when they would control someone's mind? What could they make someone do when they manipulated their brains?
Well, what it describes in the documents and in the published papers is there's actually photographs of a 16-year-old girl. She's got a series of electrodes in her brain. Depending on which button's being pushed on the transmitter, she's either strumming her guitar, pounding furiously on the wall, or staring off into space. With the animals, they're actually directed to walk or swim to a target. So you can control the actual physical motion and the mental state. How detailed and how fine-tuned that's gotten since 1970, again, I don't know because it's all classified. And it must have gotten a lot more developed.
How fast can this happen? I mean, how fast can someone's mind be taken over? Does it happen over a period of weeks or days?
Well, the electrodes is a little different because you just put the electrode in, you push the button, and it happens right away. But with a more brainwashing style where there's sensory deprivation, sensory isolation, hypnosis, good cop, bad cop techniques, we're talking months minimum. It's a long-term conditioning process.
And how long can someone's mind be controlled? I've seen videos of people in these kind of hypnotic states. How long are they in those states?
Well, they come back in experimental literature that's published in normal journals. You can have a post-hypnotic suggestion that's implanted that the person doesn't remember, and you can tap into it months at least later, if not years. In the brainwashing literature, apparently people can be in a sleeper state indefinitely. But of course, this is all secret and classified, so you can't actually document and prove it.
And you mentioned that you are convinced that this could still be going on today. What other kind of experiments do you think the CIA could be doing today?
Well, I would say intelligence agencies around the world probably have Manchurian candidate sleepers operative today. And they're using a whole range of techniques to control and create them, which is, in terrorist organizations, there's going to be the religious doctrine part of it. But it's the basic mind control programming technology that we've known about for decades. You control a person's life space, control the information flow, talk to them, convince them, frighten them, terrorize them, soften them up with hypnosis, drugs, which can be IV drugs or drugs by mouth. So it's a whole range of different techniques. It's not just one thing.
Wow, yeah, it's a very unbelievable story, but so fascinating. That was Dr. Colin Ross, president of the Colin A. Ross Institute for Psychological Trauma.
So let's see. What do we have in the Lori Vallow Daybell incident? Well, she meets Melanie Gibb, and approximately in February or March of 2019, she disappears. Her husband, Charles Vallow, has no idea where she went. And then she reemerges with talking about all this babbling nonsense of she's a goddess and a translated being, and her husband, Charles Vallow, is a zombie who needs to be killed, and And so what do you think? I think that if I were the defense team for Lori Vallow, I'd be doing brain scans right now to see if there's any implants or to see if her brain looks like it's been under an assault of mind control. And it is very clear what a brain looks like when it's been assaulted by a mind control scientist. It looks very similar to an autistic brain or a psychopathic brain. It has very little brain activity in the frontal lobes, the midbrain, and all the activities in the amygdala and what we call the lower half, or the primitive brain, or the reptilian brain at the back of the head. So Lori Vallow may have been a narcissist to begin with, but I believe that she has been chemically or electronically manipulated to be the monster that she is today, a monster who would kill her own children. Yes, call me a sympathetic boob, but I do sympathize with Charles Vallow, who tried so urgently to save his wife and his children, and nobody would listen. Perhaps, maybe some of us should start listening to Charles Vallow as he tries to save his wife and the rest of us who might be under assault by these most heinous, mind-controlled people. If we can call them people, let's call them creatures.